all new video for the VA today on the iFly MAX8 and the NG differences. Today is October 16th of 2024. The MAX just came out about 2 days ago. I've done a few flights in it myself, and so far I think it's fantastic. The greatest thing, or one of the greatest things about the new aircraft here, is its ability to do the RF legs on an RNAV RNP approach. I do believe PMDG is still working on that, trying to get that implemented. Hopefully they do get that done. Now obviously this aircraft has its own flaws in its own way, but it's new and they're still working through a lot of these things. And hopefully they get all their issues fixed out too. I know there's people have had some problems with the aircraft. So far for me it's been great. I just wanted to do a differences video for you over here between the MAX and the NG aircraft, same type rating. So a lot of the features and functionality are the same. A lot of what's different is just the motors and engine starting procedures. Obviously, we've got different systems like MCAS. You got the displays here, vertical situation display. A lot of the switch positions have been moved or changed slightly. Some new lights on the overhead, some new systems. We'll try to talk about all that stuff as briefly as possible. I only want to really hit on the things that are going to affect you on your day-to-day flying, namely engine start procedures, warm up, that sort of thing. So with the MAX and the LEAP motors, you're going to notice that when you take that engine start switch to ground and go to start that engine, you're going to see that N2 is going to say motoring. And we're going to do a full flight video here with this aircraft as well to show you that engine start procedure. We'll just talk about it here right now. That motoring can take well over a minute. It just depends on how warm or cool that engine is. First flight of the day, it may only motor for 20 to 30 seconds or less. And you'll see that motoring indication go away, get the rise in N2, and then you can take that engine start lever, go to idle, start the motor. These do run quite a bit hotter. You will see the EGT come up a bit higher than you're probably used to seeing with the NG. Completely normal. The EEC, if there was a problem, you would see that white box flash. It would shut down all on its own, so there's really nothing you need to even worry about with that. Engine start temperatures are quite a bit higher. The max limit for EGT is 753 degrees as opposed to the NG of 725 degrees. The other big thing in your day-to-day flying, operating the engines at or near idle after rollback for a minimum of 3 minutes prior to applying takeoff thrust. First flight of the day, recommended 5 minutes. Operating engines at or near idle for a minimum of 3 minutes prior to shutdown. Luckily, Ryan has LC5 and Rachel designed to start that clock for you after rollback and after the flaps up command after landing to help you get that 3 minutes of warm up or cool down time. I want to cover briefly some of the overhead lights, new things here in a nutshell. Elevator jam landing assist, if we were to take this and flip that on. What that is essentially for is if you had an elevator jam, you could flip that on. It uses the flight spoilers to help with pitch control of the aircraft. We have dual channel GPS, ILS, GLS lights that have been added here. For all of these things, obviously you'd want to use a QRH, run through a checklist. There is a checklist available on the VA Google Drive. Something else that's really great that I use is called the Cockpit Companion. It's you can find a downloadable PDF of that also on the Google Drive, or you can go to the App Store. It's $60, but it covers every light, every switch in full detail, so it's a really great app. Single channel, dual channel, meaning if I was to go down here in my descent checklist, we'll say press the recall and I was to see IRS with the master caution and look up here, one of those is going to be illuminated, telling me that I had a single channel failure. If the light was simply illuminated without doing the recall, that would be a dual channel failure. So run the QRH and let maintenance know when you land. Again, all these things are probably not even going to be something you're going to encounter. I'm not sure that you can even enable these as failures in the aircraft. The maintenance light, in the NG, we had a PSEU light here. What this is for fault detection, notify maintenance if this light illuminates. Similar to the PSEU light on the NG, the maintenance light is inhibited from the time the first engine start switch is placed to ground until 30 seconds after landing. So they're not going to tell you in flight. You're going to see that come on maybe after you land. Reverser command, reverser air to ground lights, reverser limited lights are all new in the MAX. reverser command light means the reverser thrust lever is not in the down or stowed position in flight. The reverser air to ground light, the QRH would tell you that the thrust reverser in flight protection is failed. Reversers will deploy in flight if commanded. Reverser limited, the EEC or electronic engine control has detected a fault in the thrust reverser system. If on the ground, do not take off. During landing or after landing, the thrust reverser will not deploy or reverse thrust will be limited. Moving down to our flight controls panel, we have a new spoilers light. It tells we have a fault in the spoilers system. If we take a look at where our APU controls are, you'll notice we no longer have an EGT gauge for the APU. When you start the APU, you'll have to simply wait for the blue light to put it on the bus. I currently have it on. You can also double check up here your volts and amps for the APU itself through the electrical panel. We have a door light. Illuminates if the APU door is not in the commanded position. So essentially on the ground, it's not in the ground position, and in flight, it's not in the flight position. The open positions on the ground is 45 degrees, and in flight is 17 degrees. We do not have a lavatory smoke light. I think that's probably pretty self-explanatory. The equipment smoke light is also fairly self-explanatory. Monitors for smoke in the supply and exhaust systems going through the EE bays where all the electronics and everything are. Got a couple new lights, different lights here for our engine anti-ice. You may remember the blue lights was basically valve positioning in the NG. These are slightly different. We have engine anti-ice condition, one or both of the following occurs. A bleed failure has caused the engine anti-ice valve to latch closed. An engine core anti-ice valve is failed closed. Cowl anti-ice is basically looking at pressure in the system. Minimum, under, or over pressure condition. Cowl valve light. We can flip that switch here. You'll see momentary related cowl anti-ice valve is in transit. If it's steady, the cowl anti-ice valve position disagrees with the related engine anti-ice switch position. So if it was to stay on, that would basically tell me that that cowl valve did not open. Our air conditioning panel here, the ram door full open blue lights have been removed, and we have a new light with the bleed, new functionality with the pack light. Looking at our pack light, it comes on immediately for four things: a pack trip, which would be an overheat condition, and oftentimes the QRH might say drive those warmer, give it some time, do a trip reset. That will usually fix that condition. A failure of both primary and standby pack controls, or failure of the full control valve, which is the pack valve, to open when commanded on, or an incorrect pack switch configuration after takeoff. The bleed light is illuminated for over temperature, over pressure, or under pressure. So you can look at that as either temperature or pressure related. Requires a reset. Again, the QRH would drive to reset with the trip reset. Hopefully that would fix the condition. Could be simply a failure in the bleed air system and may not be resettable, or an incorrect bleed air configuration after takeoff or go around. Maybe you forgot to turn those on in your checklist or before you took off. We can take a look down here now at our MCP. Really nothing has changed there. Sliding over our EFIS control panel, we now have this VSD button, our vertical situation display. That's going to show up below the ND here. You can see that swath, the two blue lines there. Anything that's inside that swath will show up on the VSD. Unfortunately, I don't have a fix inside the swath to show you any sort of altitude constraints or restrictions. You'll see that white line. It'll be vertical, semi-vertical, up or down, to show what you're looking at in terms of, are you going to make those crossing restrictions. It gives you that profile view. You also see an open green circle or a closed green circle, and that's going to be like speed trend and whether you're going to meet certain speed restrictions, that kind of thing. Looking here, activate this, and that will do a couple things up here as well. If I activate and execute, now we've got our auxiliary display unit over here on the side, which is kind of nice. That would usually show whether our Cat 1, Cat 3 status, our clock, flight number, transponder, cell call code, tail number, UTC or Zulu time, date, and elapsed time of the flight. Good stuff over there. That, of course, that flight number is populated once we have our flight number inputted in the FMC here. And when we do that, we can also see it in the progress page. We've talked about that many a time before. A lot of switch positions have changed. Our lights test position has changed. Our auto brake position has changed. Fuel flow reset has changed. Nose wheel steering position has changed. A lot of that is more centralized, we'll say. We now have fuel totalizer. I'm showing 10,740 pounds added up here, no more public math. You can also go to our init ref page, which is how we mostly did it in the NG, to see what we were showing for fuel. Flap gauge is digital. Below the engine gauges here, we've got the low oil pressure lights there. We're going to add two new indicators there. We've got a thrust, which would basically show whether or not we're getting the commanded thrust from the thrust lever position. And then fuel flow underneath that, and that's going to tell us that there's a difference between actual engine fuel flow rate and the FMC's expected fuel flow rate, and that might lead us to a fuel leak checklist. We talked about temperatures, we talked about motoring. We've got the engine button here, our system button here, our engine transfer button here. A couple other things that you might notice. Let's first go here. Our MCDU in the menu page. Our HGS controls now are all driven through the MCDU. Our runway length, elevation, glide slope angle, our HGS modes can all be selected here. Even the arm will show up there. Clear HGS, if you have the HUD down and you can't see anything in the HUD, it's like, oh, this thing appears to be broken. Make sure that that is not accidentally cleared for some reason. The engines themselves, I'll tell you that taxi is quite easy in this aircraft. When you pop that parking brake and go to taxi, you don't even need to push the thrust levers up. This thing has a lot of extra residual thrust, big fan blades there. It's ready to go. It doesn't take much, if any, additional thrust to taxi the aircraft. As I said, the landing gear lever does not have an off position. Take a look at that again. Just make sure that once the gear is up, you just leave it up. Unfortunately, one thing that I don't care much for this aircraft that I hope that they get fixed, especially as you guys know with the whole MCAS thing and the stab trim cutout switches here. If you were to have a runaway stabilizer, the checklist would direct you to cut both of these switches out. And sadly, in this aircraft, that has no effect. The PMDG did get it right. There is a main electric switch down there for the stab trim. And if you were to flip that switch, it would cut the wheel out. I'm not sure how they've got this programmed. With any luck, they'll get that adjusted. That is part of the speed trim and MCAS function. If we were to have an issue there, would be to put both of those switches to cut out if we had a runaway stabilizer. So hopefully they get that looked at. Externally on the aircraft, just a couple things to point out. Looking at the aircraft itself, the nose wheel, the nose gear is raised about 8 inches. It sits a little higher for the engine clearance. Of course, we got the new LEAP motors that are much better in terms of fuel efficiency, a lot quieter. I do like sitting in the back of these aircraft. I think they're very quiet. Got the split wing Simtar here with the nav light on the back side of the Simtar. Adds 5 inches to the wing span. Looking at the back side of the aircraft, your APU door is quite a bit different. Of course, I'm using the Herb Kelleher livery here. And we talked about the air and ground positions of that APU door. We've got a 2-position tail skid. You can see it's in its extended position right now. We've got the smooth tail cone and the dual strobe lights on the tail. Pretty much covers the exterior things with the aircraft. I think that's all I really had to show you. If you have any questions, feel free to ask in the Discord, and hope that helps.